Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. Yesterday over on Hardware Unboxed, we published a video covering the best gaming monitors you can buy right now. However, that video is primarily looking at the US market and is focused on US pricing, which only really applies in some parts of North America. The United States provides around 25% of our viewership, which is the largest of any country, hence why we almost always use US pricing, but many of you have requested a more specific version of these videos for other countries, especially Europe as a whole. So today I'm providing a Europe-specific best monitors video. I tallied the numbers and about 45% of our viewers are based in a European nation. So shout out to all of you guys. Hopefully this video will be what you're after. Same sort of format as the other video. We're primarily recommending monitors we've tested and know to be good. Check out our in-depth monitor reviews for more info on each product, and of course these recommendations are not sponsored in any way by any company. They're based on our testing and reviews. European pricing is much more complicated than US pricing, as companies have various different prices for each country, and discounts or limited time promotions may only apply to one country instead of the entirety of Europe. There's also multiple currencies to worry about, including the euro, the British pound, and all the other smaller currencies. So if we went through talking about prices in over 30 individual countries, this would be a very long video indeed. Instead, I'm going to take a more general approach to European pricing, focusing mostly on the Eurozone, using an average of best prices from many retailers across multiple countries. You're still going to have to do some digging into specific prices for your country, but this should give an idea of generally what products are better buys in Europe compared to North America, where indeed some products are cheaper and some more expensive relative to pricing across the Atlantic. I've never really done a video like this looking at Europe instead of the US, so bear with me here. I'm a bit less familiar with the market in Europe than the US, but I'll give it my best shot. So let's get into it. What's been a great trend throughout 2022 is the continual price reductions for pretty much every type of 1440p monitor. It's never been cheaper to buy a 1440p gaming display than it is right now, and there are heaps of choices across many different categories. So it's important that you think about what size and refresh rate you're interested in, as that will narrow down the choices significantly. Let's start with 1440p medium refresh, which is an extremely competitive market and one with excellent value deals and heaps of bang for buck on offer. If you're after a budget sort of display for your gaming setup, this is where I'd be looking. And what's clear during this holiday period of 2022 is that you'll want to be paying around 300 to 350 euros for a 27-inch 1440p 165Hz-ish monitor. That's standard pricing today, and I wouldn't want to be forking out more than 400 euros unless it was an especially premium product. For US viewers, my choice here was the Gigabyte M27QP, but unfortunately in Europe, this monitor is not well priced, often costing over 400 euros, which makes it hard to recommend. The one exception to this is in the UK, where it can be found for £300, a good price, but other countries aren't getting a good deal. So if the M27QP is overpriced, here's what I'd do instead. The two standouts that I can see in Europe are the HP X27Q at around 300 euros and the LG 27GP850 for around 350 euros, although at times pricing may be even closer between these models. Basically, if you only have about 300 euro in the bank, the X27Q is a great choice. It offers a 27-inch 1440p 165Hz IPS LCD, and despite a more budget price point, it has very similar motion performance to other monitors with similar specs. Color performance is acceptable, it's not a standout, and it doesn't have an especially wide gamut, but it's fine given the price. However, for most people who do have a bit of flexibility with pricing, I'd opt for the 27GP850, especially if it's a similar price to the X27Q or cheaper than the M27QP. Typical pricing puts this LG model only 17% more expensive than the X27Q, whereas the gap in the US is more like 35%, and this definitely puts the value equation in favor of the LG in Europe. I think spending 50 euros more to get the 27GP850 is worth it, given it's a better performer in all areas. The 27GP850 is a 27-inch 1440p 180Hz IPS monitor that uses an LG Nano IPS panel, meaning we get great 98% coverage of DCI-P3, a well-tuned sRGB mode, great brightness and viewing angles, plus very strong response times at a refresh rate higher than other models. This is a really great monitor, and the only reason I tend not to recommend it in our other videos is it's not that competitively priced in some regions. But in Europe, where it's often around 300 to 350 euros, that's a stellar deal and I'd recommend it. If you have a bit more than 350 euros to spend and want an upgrade pick, I'd be looking at a couple of products. The MSI Optics MAG274 QRF-QD is one we continue to recommend at around 400 euros, and it's better than the 27GP850, although the advantage is mostly in color quality. Much wider color gamut, including decent Adobe RGB coverage and a higher contrast ratio, is why you'd pay about 50 euros more, which is a fair price, but nothing overly special. In some countries like Germany, the MSI model is only slightly more expensive than the LG model, in which case definitely get the MSI, though this isn't typical. In the US version of this video, I also mentioned it might be worth considering a 32-inch 1440p monitor as an upgrade pick, but I feel this is less true in Europe. Pricing for many 32-inch 1440p models is not good. For example, the Corsair 32 QHD 165 goes from 350 US to nearly 600 euros on average. So the Corsair is definitely out of the equation at that price, and the M32Q that we also recommended just doesn't have strong value here. The best option is LG's 32GP850, which is much more competitively priced in Europe compared to the US, and is what I'd recommend. When opting for a 240Hz 1440p monitor, in the US I generally recommend the M27QX from Gigabyte, which has a shockingly low price. But in Europe I'd actually go with the Samsung Odyssey G7 instead, which in its 27-inch variant can often be found around 400 to 450 euros. It's also a 1440p 240Hz product like the M27QX, but swaps the flat IPS for a curved V8. Not for everyone, but it does have its benefits. The G7 has an excellent contrast ratio, delivering deep, rich blacks, and it's also a step above IPS options in motion performance thanks to faster response times and excellent tuning. It's not as versatile and makes a name for itself as a gaming-first display, but it's the standout option for 240Hz 1440p gaming at below 500 euros. The M27QX might be worth considering if you specifically want a flat panel, but when its average price is around 530 euros, it just doesn't have the value of the Odyssey G7, which I also feel is the better product in general. Lastly, if you're after the ultimate 1440p experience, the best of the best, that goes to the Asus ROG Swift PG27AQN. It's the first and currently only 1440p 360Hz monitor, doing so with a 27-inch IPS panel. It has seriously excellent performance, including class-leading response times for an IPS LCD, and really any 1440p monitor, extremely good motion clarity and input lag thanks to its stunning 360Hz refresh rate, and it's very well calibrated at the factory, delivering accurate colors. From a performance standpoint, there aren't many products offering better than the PG27AQN at a 1440p resolution right now. The main downside here is mostly the price, which is why I wouldn't recommend it for everyone. 1100 euros is very expensive, especially so compared to other 1440p 240Hz monitors that are around 500 euros. Needing to spend over 600 euros to go from 240 to 360Hz does sting, though for buyers with deep pockets it could be well worth it, especially for serious competitive gaming. 4K gaming monitors have quickly gone from a relatively niche product to something that you should seriously consider as your next display, especially if you have any plans to upgrade to a new GPU in the near future. High refresh rate 4K gaming is a reality right now, and while 4K monitors aren't nearly as affordable as 1440p displays, there are some great choices in several categories. When talking about the US market and mainstream 27-inch-ish 4K monitors, I brought up four options. We've got the Gigabyte M28U, the MSI Optics MAG281 URF, the Asus TUF Gaming VG28 UQL1A, and the Samsung Odyssey G7 S28. All four of these displays are very similar, and due to European pricing changing a lot between countries, I think it's still worth mentioning all of them, as generally I'd recommend you get just the cheapest one in your country. However, looking at the more general European market closely, it's not often that they are as closely priced as in other regions. The Asus model, for example, is typically priced well above €600, which is not at all competitive. Similarly, the MSI variant sits at about €600. Both of these are usually more expensive than the other options, so I wouldn't consider them. In most European countries I looked at, it's a toss-up between the Samsung and Gigabyte monitors as to which is cheaper, with both priced in the €500 region. This significantly narrows the playing field and makes it easy to pick which monitor to get. Both use the same Interlux panel, so the basics to performance are very similar. Especially when it comes to response times and tuning, you can essentially expect to get the same level of motion clarity, all bring around a 5 millisecond average with great overdrive tuning and up to 144Hz on its 28-inch 4K IPS panel. Trying to separate them is hard. The M28U has a few limitations, chiefly its limited bandwidth HDMI 2.1 ports. That's fine for PC users, but if you're also planning on using this display with the PlayStation 5, I'd recommend the Samsung instead. On the other hand, the M28U has the best factory calibration and the best sRGB mode, so it's ideal for those that don't care much about the HDMI 2.1 capabilities, and in several countries it's also the cheaper model. If HDMI 2.1 bandwidth is important to you, then I'd go with the Samsung model, and I'd also go Samsung if it was a bit cheaper. As an upgrade choice for those with more than €500 to spend, I'd consider the LG 27GP950, which is available for €650 to €700. It's not substantially better than the 28-inch models we've been talking about, certainly not to justify its higher price tag, but it is a better and more capable monitor in some areas. As it's a 27-inch 4K 160Hz IPS monitor, it does bump up its refresh rate slightly, though motion performance is otherwise similar, as it delivers response times in the same ballpark. The main reason to go with the GP950 though is more in the color performance side of things. It gets much brighter, has a higher contrast ratio and full 98% DCI-P3 color space coverage. If those things matter to you, the LG is a great choice, although for most buyers I think it's the lesser value product. Also important to think about when going 4K is whether you'd like a larger screen size, as 4K still looks excellent at 32 inches. Unfortunately, Europeans don't have access to as competitive pricing as the US, with many 32-inch models overpriced compared to current US pricing. For example, the MSI Optics MPG 321UI-QD goes from $800 to €1,000, and the M32U goes from $650 to over €700 in some countries, though €650 is seen at times. Despite less than ideal pricing, I would opt for the M32U. This Gigabyte monitor is very similar to the Aorus FI32U that we tested, and it offers great performance for a 32-inch 4K gaming monitor. It's well balanced between color performance and motion performance without excelling in either area, although I think you'll be satisfied with what it brings. More expensive monitors like the MSI Optics MPG 321UI-QD do offer a wider color gamut at a higher price tag, but for the majority of gamers I think the M32U is a great choice, especially if it's available for less than €700 in your country. As for the ultimate 4K monitor, the best of the best, for this I think we need to start looking at HDR options where several choices are available. Adding HDR into the mix, real HDR that is, typically comes at a several €100 premium, but in some cases that is definitely worth it for the visual upgrade it brings, especially if you're after the best. While I will elaborate more on this shortly, I think the two best options right now for 4K buyers looking for a premium monitor are the Samsung Odyssey Neo G7 and the LG C2 42-inch OLED. These are very different products of course, but both offer true HDR hardware and are great buys depending on what you're after. The Odyssey Neo G7 is the more straightforward choice. It's a 32-inch 4K 165Hz VA LCD priced at around €1,000, which is a decent price for what it offers. The killer feature here is the 1196 zone full array local dimming backlight, which helps deliver fantastic HDR visuals, including deep blacks, great shadow detail, and bright highlights all at the same time. On top of this, you're getting elite VA LCD speed with Samsung's excellent tuning, and while the panel is annoyingly curved and isn't the best for productivity work, the HDR gaming experience it offers is next level. The LG C2 OLED is also a good choice, these days being offered for around €900 to €1,000 in its 42-inch size, which is much cheaper than some alternatives that use the same panel, like the Asus PG42UQ, which is just outrageously priced in Europe. As it's an OLED, it has per-pixel local dimming, delivering an unbeatable HDR experience with excellent deep blacks and a still solid level of brightness. It's also extremely fast in terms of response times, though limited to a degree due to its 120Hz refresh rate. The C2 is a large display as well, so it's not always going to fit into a standard gaming setup, and it has some OLED related limitations like the risk of burn-in and so on. But if you're after a great 4K gaming display with proper HDR capabilities, the C2 is one to look out for, especially now that it's priced below €1,000. In late 2022, there is finally good news to share in the HDR section of these videos because at long last, there are a number of really solid HDR options to recommend. HDR is still a premium category, so if you want proper, true HDR performance, you'll need to be willing to part with at least €900. But at the same time, real HDR monitors have never been cheaper, and I can finally recommend jumping into this ecosystem. When recommending HDR monitors at the moment, I tend to go with three options: the Alienware AW3423DW, the LG C2 OLED in a 42-inch size, and the Samsung Odyssey Neo G7. These three are quite different in many ways, except for all offering a proper HDR experience for high-end shoppers. I have a great video on this very channel that more closely explores these products and the differences between them, but I'll do my best summarizing it all here. When trying to come up with the best overall HDR option, I'm torn over whether to put the Alienware or the LG OLED in the number one position. The Samsung Odyssey Neo G7 with its VA LCD panel I would comfortably place in third. The motion clarity isn't as good as other OLED monitors in my opinion. The HDR experience is good, but not as good as the OLEDs, and while brightness is better, it's let down by Samsung's weaker color accuracy, bad viewing angles, and less solid HDR optimization. It's not as competitively priced in Europe as the US, but around €1,000 is still decent. The reason why I can still recommend the Neo G7 in some instances is that it's the most standard desktop-friendly size. If you don't want the enormity of the C2 or the ultra-wide nature of the Alienware, then the Neo G7 is a great choice, provided you can tolerate the 1000R curvature. It has the best text clarity and is perhaps the most suited to more normal desktop use. And while it may not be as good as the OLEDs in some areas, it still has really solid performance in many areas for an LCD, with impressive HDR performance thanks to its 1196 zone backlight. As for the OLEDs, which one to get will come down to size preferences. The 42-inch C2 is large and a totally different format to the 34-inch ultra-wide AW3423DW. If there's any hesitation around ultra-wides or large displays, the choice one way or another is pretty obvious. But I think there's a lot of reason to be on the fence here. After all, the C2 is actually a bit wider than the ultra-wide AW3423DW and gives you a lot more height for a greater overall screen area. Here are the separating factors for me. The AW3423DW is a higher refresh rate 175Hz display that's better suited to PC use due to its DisplayPort connector, higher sustained brightness, and better burn-in policy. It has similar HDR performance to the LG C2 and at times can actually get brighter while obviously maintaining similar black levels. It has good factory calibration, great HDR accuracy, and decent stand ergonomics. The LG C2 is in the lead with its feature set. It's a full-blown TV with smart features and a much wider range of calibration options, including support for Dolby Vision, which the AW3423DW doesn't support. It's larger, has a better display coding, better subpixel layout, and has better console compatibility thanks to HDMI 2.1 support. It is also a lower processing latency display, and LG supports their products very well through software updates, unlike the Alienware, which doesn't even have user-upgradable firmware. Personally, I would slightly prefer the Alienware over the LG. I think the refresh rate and brightness advantages just get me over the line, but I could certainly quite easily make a case for the C2 as well, and I've loved my time using both of these displays. When choosing either of these OLEDs, I think it's hard to make a bad choice. Neither are perfect options and there's plenty of room for improvement, but the image quality they provide for gamers today is outstanding. Also, it's important to note there is a new variant of the AW3423DW called the AW3423DWF, which is a 165Hz variant that omits the G-Sync module, and should end up costing less, although pricing isn't announced for Europe yet. I expect this to perform very similarly to the model we tested, so it should be considered. As for LG C2 variants using the same panel, such as the PG42UQ, unfortunately most of these are simply too expensive right now to get my recommendation. The PG42UQ is great, but I'm not sure I'd pay over 50% more than the C2 right now. LG's latest discounted prices are simply too aggressive, and ASUS are not pricing the PG42UQ well in Europe. When buying HDR at the moment, you'll typically have to sacrifice versatility, desktop usability, and productivity to get the ultimate for HDR gaming. Both the OLED options have non-standard subpixel layouts and are at risk of permanent burn-in when viewing static content for long periods, so based on that I can't recommend them for desktop usage. Meanwhile, the Neo G7's aggressive 1000R curvature is also not well suited to productivity work as it tends to distort the image. These are not deal breakers for content consumption, but the other choices in this video might be better suited to you if you need a single display for multiple use cases. While we haven't reviewed many ultra-wide monitors in 2022, there are some great options in this category right now, including one that we've just been talking about in the HDR section, the Alienware AW3423DW. This makes awarding a winner in this category very easy, as the Alienware monitor, or its FreeSync brother, the DWF model, is certainly the best ultra-wide you can get right now. It's priced well for the features it has, and overall I think it's actually one of the best monitors on the market that you can get. The big selling point to this Alienware display is its use of QD OLED technology. This means that we get proper, true HDR performance thanks to OLED's self-lit pixel structure and resulting deep, zero-level blacks. This QD OLED panel can hit up to 1000 nits of brightness for small elements and just looks great displaying HDR content. Combined with its extremely fast response times thanks to the inherent nature of OLED technology and fast 175Hz refresh rate, there is no better monitor on the entire market for HDR gaming right now. Of course, aside from HDR gaming, it's also a very capable SDR monitor as well, and despite featuring OLED tech, it doesn't have some of the drawbacks we've seen from other OLED displays. In particular, full screen brightness of 240 nits is usable in most rooms, though not amazing, and there's no annoying features like automatic brightness limiters enabled when using the SDR mode. Dell also mitigates the anxiety over OLED's tendency to burn in with a 3-year burn-in warranty. However, there are some drawbacks which do restrict the capabilities of the AW3423DW to content consumption. The triangle RGB pixel structure is not great for text clarity and can cause fringing on some content, which may be noticeable depending on how sensitive you are. I can notice it personally and have heard mixed results from others. And despite the burn-in warranty, there is a risk of burn-in which is exacerbated when using the display, mostly for static imagery like spreadsheets or other productivity apps. I'd only recommend this monitor if you are primarily going to be using it for gaming or other content consumption like watching videos. Other problems include the display's coating and layer composition, which can reflect a lot of ambient light depending on your room setup. To get the full benefit of this display, I'd recommend using it in a dark room, ideally pitch black, so the deep blacks of OLED can shine. It's also actively cooled and the fan can be heard while it's running. Despite these negatives though, you won't find a better ultrawide monitor or better HDR gaming monitor for the price tag of €1,300. Not everyone has €1,300 to spend though, so if HDR isn't what you're after and you want a regular ultrawide that's affordable, I'd recommend the Gigabyte M34WQ. It's a bit unusual being a flat 34-inch 3440 by 1440 140 for its IPS display, but what it offers at around €500 is an excellent balance of performance across the various areas we test and look for. Response times are good, color performance is good, and there are no huge negatives such as dark level smearing that you do get with most budget VA ultrawides. That's not to say there are no cons here. The contrast ratio is weak in comparison to its VA competitors, and response times aren't as fast as premium IPS gaming ultrawides, but the versatility of its IPS panel and general performance is what swings me towards this product compared to others on the market. In the 1080p product class, I think it's actually quite a simple story these days. Either you're after an entry-level monitor to get started with PC gaming, and I think 1080p is still a suitable choice if you have less than €200 to spend, or you're more interested in a super high refresh rate option for competitive gaming with features like backlight strobing and fast response times a priority. In the US version of this video, I recommended the new AOC 24G2SP here because at $160 US it was hard to go past. But in Europe, this monitor and its older brother, the 24G2, are regularly priced at around €200, which isn't as competitively priced. Instead, I recommend buyers look at the BenQ EX2510S, the 165Hz version of the EX2510 we reviewed, which is priced at just €180, typically cheaper than the AOC model in most countries, for a similar, if not superior experience. The EX2510S uses a different panel to the 24G2SP, though both are overall somewhat similar, as the BenQ model is still a 24.5-inch 1080p 165Hz IPS offering. The strength of this particular panel is its response time speed, with the model we tested beating the AOC in motion performance. The drawback here is that it lacks a wide colour gamut, only offering sRGB colour space coverage, though for standard SDR gaming this is pretty much a non-issue. The contrast ratio is also a bit weaker, though still fine for budget class products. Some people may question why you'd buy a 1080p monitor in 2022, but the simple answer here is that 1440p monitors aren't that cheap yet. For most gamers, I would recommend getting one of our 1440p choices like the 27GP850 instead, but if you simply don't have 300 or more euros to spend, then going 1080p is your option, and the EX2510S offers something great here. If you're after a premium monitor for esports gaming, I haven't tested too many of these recently, but the go-to choice at the moment appears to be the BenQ XL2566K. We're yet to test this monitor and are hoping to look at it soon, but the basics here are a 24.5-inch 1080p 360Hz TN panel with elite backlight strobing capabilities and super fast response times. This makes the XL2566K highly suited to competitive gaming, where clarity and speed are the two top priorities. I've seen some reviews of this display from other reviewers, and I've been super impressed with the UFO test results, where the diac strobing mode is enabled. This is a pretty niche product though, as BenQ have priced it at a whopping 600 euros or more in some countries, which is very expensive for a 1080p monitor and something that only serious competitive gamers should buy. For everyday, more casual gamers, there's a lot more value to be had buying a 600 euro 4K monitor or an elite 1440p display, especially as the TN panel used here isn't going to deliver very good color performance or viewing angles. But the XL2566K is there if motion clarity is the number one thing you are interested in and are satisfied with a 1080p resolution. And that does it for today's monitor recommendation video. Lots and lots of options to choose from, covering most of the categories I hope you are considering at the moment. If you do want to learn more about the monitors we've talked about today, we do have dedicated reviews for most of them that will go into the specifics around performance and features, which are well worth watching. Some of them you'll find on this channel, some of them over on Hardware Unboxed. I also have longer breakdowns available for the best 1080p, 1440p and 4K monitors on Hardware Unboxed, though just be aware that some of those recommendations may be less relevant in today's market depending on pricing and other options since we made those videos, and all of those are more US focused videos, whereas this obviously is a European focused video. Anyway, that's it for this one. Just bit of an experiment going through and redoing some of our recommendations for the European market. If you are in Europe and you appreciate something like this and want more of these sorts of videos in the future, please do let me know in the comments below. Also, subscribe to Monitors Unboxed. Thanks to everyone that's done that so far. And also consider supporting our independent testing via our Patreon and Floatplane accounts. Links to those are in the description below. You get access to things like our monthly live streams, our Discord community, and also behind the scenes videos. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.